Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly radio show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today I'll be speaking with Senator Liz Stefanics, the Democratic State Senator for District 39, a sprawling district that covers parts of 6 counties: Bernalillo, Lincoln, San Miguel, Santa Fe, Torrance, and Valencia counties. So she's covering a lot of ground. We get to Liz in just a minute, but first a few brief announcements. Last week, I spoke with Charles Goodmacher, a consultant for New Mexico Voices for Children and other good causes and organizations. He's involved in developing and advocating for legislation to create a public health and climate change program within the health department. The program would be charged with evaluating the relationship between health, public health, and climate change, and then funding evidence-based practices designed to mitigate or prevent the harm done by climate-created catastrophes. So it's a big topic, and since Senator Stefanics is one of the bill's sponsors, we'll get her take on the bill as well. She's also got a bunch of 6 other bills that she's introducing, all related to climate, so we're going to talk about those as well. I want to remind you that if you're listening to the show while driving around town and miss any of the show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior interview by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on Retake on the Radio button on the lower right side of the homepage. You'll find recordings of all our previous shows listed there in chronological order, so you can binge watch Retake radio shows for free and cancel your Apple TV subscription. Retake took a break during the holidays with only one blog and no huddles, but the session is almost upon us. So next Wednesday at 6 p.m., we'll resume our 1-hour weekly Zoom huddles, where we will discuss the bills we support and develop messaging and strategies for passing those bills. Huddles are also a great way to connect with other advocates. So join us, learn more about how the legislature works and how you can lobby effectively. You must register to attend. To get more info and a link to register, go to retakeourdemocracy.org, click on Actions and Events in the homepage banner, and you'll find a link near the top of the page. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn much from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air, and we better learn it fast. Okay, let's meet Senator Liz Stefanics. Welcome to the show, Liz. It's been almost a year since you've been on the show.
That's right. And happy holidays to you and all of the listeners.
Yeah, it's almost New Year's. Countdown is on. So
I hope we get a little white. We have some rain this morning, but I hope we get a little white as well.
Yes, we're recording for our radio listeners and others. We're recording this on Wednesday, so it's a little bit before New Year's Eve, but this will air on Saturday morning, New Year's Eve day. So we're pretending it's New Year's Eve. Happy New Year, everybody. So I'd like to let our guests introduce themselves. So please introduce yourself, Senator, and tell us how and why you got involved in the Senate and what motivated you to become a legislator.
Well, back in the 90s, I was a political unknown. I was running a nonprofit called Open Hands and serving elders and disabled people in northern New Mexico. We had a facility here in town that had adult daycare and several other programs. We had volunteer home visiting. We weatherized people's homes. We retrofitted people's homes for when they were older or had disabilities and needed help building ramps, putting in grab bars. I did that for 11 years. And during that period of time, there was a redistricting. And the redistricting is when you look at, is there a spot that you might run for office? Now, when I moved to New Mexico, it was very interesting because I came from Ohio, and in Ohio, politics is very corporate. And in New Mexico, politics is very volunteer. And so when I moved to New Mexico, I helped with voter registration. I helped collect petition signatures for candidates. I kind of got involved in the process that I had never been involved with before. And I thought, maybe someday I will do this as well. I moved here in the 80s. So when this redistricting happened, it changed the counties that were in District 39, and I thought I could do this. But I was a political unknown. So I got into a primary. There were 4 other Democrats who happened to be all men and myself. And being the different looking duck, I won the primary. So then I went on to
There may have been a
win.
little bit more to it than that.
Well, it was hard work, but it really, I think, having a division of the sexes and having 4 and 1 really did help my odds in terms of gathering votes. And so I went on to win the general election. It was a Democratic district, and that was back in the early 90s. I did lose after that first 4-year term to Senator Phil Griego, and I ran for office a couple more times, went on to become a Santa Fe County Commissioner for 8 years, and then I decided to get back into the fray. Governor Susana Martinez had appointed a gentleman from Torrance County to take the senator's seat. And in my opinion, it was a Democratic seat. She put a Republican in it. And I went, we got to take that seat back. And so that's why I ran to get back into it. So all in all, it's been very rewarding. I've gotten to know people in my district from all 6 counties. And we all have differences, but we all work together.
Do you travel a lot to the different counties to meet with constituents? How do you manage that?
I traveled far more before COVID than I did after. And some things are not in full bloom yet. Some things are being done by Zoom. So I participate in a lot of meetings by Zoom. Occasionally, for example, down in Valencia County, they like to have the Democrats come together, eat, have presentations, have discussion groups at the tables, which I think is a great idea. But even then, when the flu happens or more COVID cases happen, they pull back for Zoom. So every county handles it a little bit differently.
So what do you think is going to happen in the legislature this year? Is it going to be hybrid, or I heard that the House is balking at doing a Zoom component.
I don't know what the House is doing, but the Senate is probably going to be all in person. We are holding our meetings all in person, and at our last big meeting, it was not decided whether or not we would take testimony by Zoom. So there was a discussion about how positive it was for people all over the state to participate by Zoom, but sometimes you have 200 people waiting to talk on Zoom, and you have 50 people in the room who want to talk, and there's not enough time for every person in that entire group. So yes, it brings more participation from Zoom, but we still have the same limited amount of time.
Yes, the time factor is always a factor. So you're going to be sponsoring legislation to address the link between climate change and public health. What are the current climate-caused public health issues and problems in New Mexico that you hope to address with this legislation? How is our health department failing to address health conditions caused by climate? And what do you hope this legislation will accomplish to address this failure?
That's a lot of questions, but I'll tackle them. First of all, I think that I like to see our Department of Health be proactive versus reactive. And every governor treats the public health facilities differently. So sometimes in the past, our public health clinics have actually treated people, not just done tests and immunizations, but actually treated people. Then they kind of pulled back to just be prevention, education, screening, and then send people off to doctors for such things, for treatment. But now I think we have a mix of that going on. We also have a situation where for the past couple of years during the pandemic, people worked at home. And now that people are being asked to come back, they're going, I'm not sure I want to go back to work with a couple thousand people in the same building. And so people are taking their retirements, they're looking for other jobs. And so we probably have a health department like all the other departments that are not fully staffed. So when I say I like to see the department be proactive, you have to have enough resources, and it doesn't just mean money and a little fund to do something. You have to have the staff to do it. And if you don't even have the staff doing the regular jobs, it's a challenge.
Right.
So going back to what could happen, we have many communities around the state that don't have a lot of resources. We have, of course, our big cities that have a base of property taxes and other gross receipts taxes that's supplementing their budgets. But all these small communities, they're really struggling. Some of our counties in the state are really close to zero budget base. And those communities, those counties, those small towns should get some assistance from somebody in the state. Now, the public health department, or it's the Department of Health, and it's the public health division in the Department of Health that would start addressing some of these issues out in the communities. They could help evaluate whether or not, and this wasn't really probably talked about yet by Charles, I don't think, lead and asbestos that's been happening for years and years and years. I have a community that's getting water from lead pipes. And is that really something we want to have happen after we saw what happened in Flint, Michigan? So when there can be an evaluation of what's happened in the past that should be taken care of and what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future, that will help a community plan. So for example, the downwinders, that happened in the past, but we should be getting behind all of the problems with the people who have dealt with nuclear fallout. The droughts, the lack of water. When there is a lack of water in our state, it affects farming, ranching, it affects safe drinking water for communities. What can the Department of Health do? Can the Department of Health then interact with other state agencies to get assistance to those communities? So first, there's the evaluation. What is every community possibly going to go through? Now, people don't really think about this, but we've been seeing it a lot on the TV this summer. When there is a forest fire, there is water that comes usually afterwards in the monsoons. And the monsoons end up flooding the watersheds and the water supply for communities. It has taken over 10 years for Ruidoso and Alamogordo to get the Bonita Lake Reservoir back up to snuff. Because when that forest fire happened many, many years ago, and there was flooding afterwards. So the Army Corps of Engineers came in, dredged, they thought everything was going to be fine. They lined the reservoir, they put the water back in, they let the water fill back up. And then the next monsoon came and just filled it with silt again. So it wasn't just the reservoir that had to be dredged and cemented. It's all the areas that was going to have the flow from the water coming in. And so let's look at forest fires. Let's look at tornadoes, which we have very few of here, but we do have a few. We have high winds. We have a lot of drought problems. So the Department of Health, Public Health Division can help with this public fund, and it would probably be contractors because we don't have enough staff to do this. It'll probably be contractors who have the expertise to go out and look. When I was at Santa Fe County, on the Santa Fe County Commission, we actually, our fire department, volunteer and professional staff, we contracted with an out-of-state group who has, and I'm going to forget the formal terms for this, they had a fire board that would actually come in and you would go through a simulation of when a fire hit a particular community and all of the after effects that could come from that fire. That helped us realize every possible thing that could come up 3 months, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a year after that fire. So there are tools that have been used in emergency management all over the country. And that's what this fund would help do. It would help with contracting and using those emergency tools to evaluate how to help these small communities. And a lot of times the small communities have people of color, they have low-income people, they have people who are just striving really hard to keep living off the land. We have low-paying wages usually out in the rural communities, but this bill would really help.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit more about the bill and some of the details of it towards the end of the show, but I know you've got six
Sure.
other bills that you've got in the
Well,
hopper.
yeah, I have a few other bills I could just comment on if you want.
Sure. What else have you got planned?
Well, I got a request from the elder law section of the bar to do something with environmentally friendly burial practices. So right now we do have cremation, we have green burials, but the green burial is county by county, and we don't have anything statewide. We also have the green, or we have cremation, of course, but we have a lot of chemicals going into the earth. And so one of the ideas is looking at different ways a body, and I know this is very personal with some people, and it could have a religious aspect, but we're trying to look at environmentally friendly ways for a body to be decomposed so that they then could be returned to the land or given to the family and the family decide. Right now, we've read about some cremation projects that have been given to a company to turn the cremations or the cremains into stones, and the stones are given to the family. We actually have a new process in this country called aquamation, which dissolves the body in water. But again, we would need to codify some of these things and put it into statute. So the environmentalists, and of course, it was brought to me by the elder law section. So we have quite a few seniors who are very interested in having environmentally friendly burials. Then I have, this kind of goes along with the first bill, the climate and public health, but I have a gentleman who lives right on the cusp of Socorro and Valencia County. And he writes me about a lot of different things. But one of his issues is about public buildings getting energy audits. And we, the taxpayers, pay a lot of money into the energy that is taking care of our fire stations, our county buildings, our city buildings, etc. And we don't always use the best energy source for that. Now, we have a process here in the state where people can get a free energy audit on a public building. And there is a gentleman in the environment department who's working with my constituent and myself to see how we could bolster then action after those energy audits to put renewable energy in or to renovate those buildings so it doesn't keep taking all the fossil fuels and putting them into the air or wasting too much energy because the building needs insulation or a new roof or whatever. And this goes back to the lead and the asbestos. We have lead paint still in some buildings, and the asbestos is there. So we have a variety of issues to talk about. Now, you know, last year, I think it was last year, I don't think it was 2 years ago, we passed the community solar bill.
Right.
But our large utilities are not wanting to they're not wanting to hook up all of the solar projects from houses or from community projects. The large utilities would like to plan the projects on their own and decide what's going to hook up, but they believe that they have too many people putting on rooftop or solar in their properties, and they don't have enough of the equipment and the power, the people power, to hook it up for transmission. So this bill is brought to me by the Coalition for Sustainable Communities, which was behind Community Solar. And I'm working with Kevin Cray and others on distributed energy resources. It would not amend the ETA, the Energy Transition Act. So we're not touching that. We're going back to the mother of the ETA, which is the Renewable Energy Act. And we're saying that when renewable energy is created, that the utilities need to take advantage of that energy and hook it up into their transmission lines for use here in our state. Now, most of the wind farms and wind towers that are here, the energy is going out of state. And that, of course, gets into energy storage. And I just started talking with somebody about energy storage. But, you know, Paul, I'm not going to be the only person carrying a lot of these environmental bills. I think there's going to be several things that are going on. I have a couple others, but do you need to take a break on this?
I need to take just a quick break here and
Sure.
to remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR, your Santa Fe public radio station. And it's at times like this, with so much misinformation out there on the mainstream news and the social media, where you need a source that has straight news, good programming, where you can get reliable information. And KSFR is your source for reliable information. They have tremendous news broadcasts from Democracy Now!, the BBC, and just their hourly news, as well as which focuses on local news. And then great programming like Richard Wolf, Economic Update, that comes on just before our show on Saturday mornings. You get a full hour of progressive radio from 8 to 9 on Saturdays. You don't get that for free. I mean, you may get it for free, but it costs money. And so I'm encouraging you, when you get done listening to this show, go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button, and give them 10, 20, 50 bucks and view it as your donation and your ticket for admission to some really important programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your generosity. Let's get back to Liz Stefanics, State Senator for District 39. And we were talking about—
Paul, let's talk about those donations a minute. You know, if people can't afford a lot of money, but they did $10 monthly, that's $120. That adds up. Or $20 a month, or $30 a month. So sometimes that's what I do. When I am on a fixed income with my retirement and Social Security, I make monthly donations to all of our great causes, but I do it in small amounts, but it adds up. So all of our listeners should think about that as well.
Okay,
so
thank you for the extra.
Sure. So I'm going to do some water bills. And people know that the state engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission and water experts from all over the state have been working on a 50-year water plan. And out of that 50-year water plan for our state, they're coming up with a 5-year strategic plan of how we can take care of the problems in our state with water. Now, in the past, I have sponsored a bill, and many others have too, on putting money into the Strategic Water Reserve. And the Strategic Water Reserve started in 2005 with about $5 million. Well, that $5 million doesn't go very far, and I'll tell you what it's for. The Strategic Water Reserve allows the state to buy and lease and hold water rights for our endangered species, and also to help all the water compacts and the promised water downstream. So, for example, I have participated in the Colorado River Forums. The state is involved in the Rio Grande settlement, and we owe water downstream from all of these entities. Right. And so this would allow the state to purchase water rights that would then translate, of course, it's paper water rights, but it translates into being able to use the water. Now, the other thing that's happening is along the Rio Grande, we have many farmers and ranchers who have been asked to consider, there's no mandate yet, they've been asked to consider fallowing their lands. And fallowing means don't farm, don't ranch, for a period of time, whether it's 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years, and we will pay you to compensate you for the losses of not carrying on your ag tradition. Now, that's controversial because some people really feel like that is my livelihood, that is my tradition, I'm going to continue doing it. Other people believe taxpayer money should not be used to help those farmers and ranchers. So the Strategic Water Reserve is for all of our water compacts, for buying up water rights, but it's also for our endangered species. So for those people who are looking at it strictly from the environmental standpoint, keep in mind it's for many uses and it will help many people.
So I have a quick question for you,
Sure.
Senator. You mentioned the idea of leaving land fallow. What about the idea of encouraging and supporting farmers to transition from high water crops like alfalfa and pecans to something that is more suitable for a desertified region, which is what we are. It's not just about drought. It's that we live in basically in a desert.
That's a great point, Paul. And yes, some of this money can be used for assisting farmers in transitioning to drip crops or to hydroponics. And in fact, in my neighborhood, it's not growing in my neighborhood, but there's a couple who are very involved in hydroponic growing. And the Santa Fe Community College is assisting students are learning more about that and taking that on. Now,
so we're going to have to,
yeah, go ahead.
We're going to have to close the show here, Senator. And so we'll continue this discussion on YouTube for our people who watch on our recording on Retake on the Radio. But we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with me today. And for those of you listening to the radio show, when you get home, click on to Retake on the Radio and you can listen to the rest of this discussion. And thank you very much. Happy New Year. Stay safe tonight. Don't do anything stupid. We need you, and stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. See you next year. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Paul, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Okay, we're back on YouTube now. And we had been talking about some water issues and some legislation you were going to advance to try and beef up our water reserve.
There's only two more things there's two more things I want to mention. The water reserve at the past, we tried to put 15 million into the fund. We'll try to put 25 million in this year since we have more money. But I mentioned this 50-year water plan and the 5-year strategic plan. Well, if we were going to do this properly, we need to go back and clean up our statutes about what the state engineer does and what the Interstate Stream Commission does. So we are rewriting, and many of your listeners might know not just Mike Hammond, but they might know Rolf Peterson Schmidt and also Norm Gom. They're all involved in helping to rewrite the statutes for the Water Resiliency Planning Act. And I'm going to be carrying this bill with Senator Worth, and that's another bill too, I should mention, but Senator Worth and I are going to do another bill on regional water systems. But this bill would really rewrite our existing statutes. And as I mentioned, we had experts from all over the state. New Mexico Tech, the geologists, Neela was so wonderful. There really were people who participated in this task force over the entire year. The task force has made recommendations to the governor. Some of this might come out in a governor's bill, but in case it doesn't, we are moving it ahead. So here's what might happen if your listeners care, is that we might start out with the bill and all of a sudden it might just kind of stall out. But that bill might get included in a governor's bill. And so lots of times when something is put into a governor's bill, it moves along a little bit faster, more easily, with fewer changes, as we saw with the ETA. So this water resiliency bill might actually get put into something larger. Now, the other thing that's a little complicated, and I'm just going to mention it, and because we're trying to get the governor on board with this, but the Coalition for Sustainable Communities came to me and said, would you carry this green bank bill? This is not a public bank. This is not public banking that's been worked on for years. This green bank really is a combination of financing for projects and projects that deal with climate. And in the Inflation Reduction Act from the federal government, there's something like $27 billion available to give the states to work on this topic. And this topic under the Green Bank, and this Green Bank is actually quoted, that term is used in the federal bill. It's money that might be able to help renewable energy in underprivileged communities or communities that cannot set this up. Now, it's totally different than the Climate Public Health Fund. That is an evaluation fund to try to help communities plan. This is a financing mechanism, the Green Bank, to actually allow communities to, it would have a board, it would probably have some ties to the finance authority, but it would be a structure for money to be given out to communities to actually complete projects. And so I would tell people, stay tuned. There's a lot going on. And I know today we're talking about environmental things, but I'm going to have about 3 pharmacy bills that are intended to help pay attention to the cost of therapeutics in pharmacy. And one is to reduce the cost by banning copay accumulators. So there's a lot on the plate, many things happening, but I know some of your supporters will get behind these bills.
I'm sure they will. I'm going to ask you about a couple of other bills that maybe aren't being sponsored by you. One is
Sure.
local choice energy. I
Yes.
think I'm pretty sure you're familiar with it, but local choice energy is going to be reintroduced this year, and it's been a lot of negotiations with the labor unions and so forth to get their support, or at least to not have their opposition, for them to remain
Right.
neutral. And so a lot of good work has been done on this, and it would provide communities with a tool for creating an alternative to the investor-owned utilities. Is that something you would be willing to support, Senator?
Yes, I'm actually one of the co-sponsors. The main sponsors, I believe, are Senator Kerry Hamlin and Representative Linda Serrato. But we have lined up many, many people to sign on.
Okay, so that's good to hear. So we don't need to spend much time on that. And you can get more info. I'm on the coalition, the Public Power New Mexico Coalition. And so there's plenty of information on the Retake website about this effort. And I encourage you to take a look at it. One of the other things I wanted to take a look at, and you started to talk about this in terms of putting money into like a green bank and so forth, and also into a water fund. But we've got this massive, almost totally unheard of surplus right now, and a very unstable funding source for our state government. And there's a lot of debate going on about what to do with that surplus, with some people saying we should offer tax cuts, some saying we should offer rebates and so forth, and sending money back to constituents and taxpayers. And some are advocating for investing it in funds, so for example, in a water fund, you might put 5 years, this year you might put 5 or 10 years worth of funding for water infrastructure and draw down on it over time in the time periods where we don't have as much money coming in. Is that something as a concept that is being discussed, do you think, at the state level?
Yes, it is. I can share with you Senator Munoz has talked with us individually about it, but his staff person, Adrian Avila, has actually presented it to several committees, and so I think it's pretty public information. And there's actually a PowerPoint that's online, and I think it was the Rural and Economic, the last committee meeting, the Rural Economic Development. And if you look towards the end of the handouts that are online, it's in that handout actually explains the buckets of money. So Senator Munoz has talked to all of us to gain support for creating very large funds for many different things, like water would be one, environment would be one, health, Medicaid, et cetera, transportation, meaning roads, so that there would be several funds, and they all might be something like $250 million. Now, you think like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. But you know what? That amount of money can be spent quickly if you have staff on the ground ready to do it. If you don't have enough staff, if we've had too many people leave the state government, then any project, any idea you come up with, there's not going to be somebody who can put it into play, who can really implement it. So we need to be a little careful. So exactly that idea, Paul, of creating funds for specific purposes that would be there for drawdowns. Now, legislators aren't totally comfortable with state agencies just going in and saying, I need this amount of money right now. They still want the state agencies to go through the legislators to say, I need X amount of this money to spend on whatever. It's like Secretary Groginski. She does the early childhood department, and she has a big fund that's available, but she has to go and ask for that transfer of money to her programs. And she has to validate why she needs that transfer of money. And that's what the legislators would like to see. We can't spend all the money at once, number one. We're not going to have this amount of money in 5 or 10 years. We've looked at all the economists. We've looked at the projections for oil and gas, which is bringing in quite a bit of this money. If we really want to transition to other forms of energy, if the oil and gas gets tapped, we have to plan prudently. So yes, I do believe the governor is planning another one-time rebate. She's talked about that publicly. And the question is, would that be for everyone, or would that be for individuals who are in dire need under a certain income level? If we mess with the taxes, it would be we would be very careful. There are many tax credits that are on the books that aren't being used. So there will be a big bill that the tax department comes forward with that we probably will support, that's a total cleanup. And the total cleanup means not a loss of revenue, because nobody's been using those credits or deductions. It's going to be a cleanup. On the other hand, we as legislators want to do something to help businesses, but also not put the middle income with the higher income in paying that high tax, that personal income tax. We have talked about, excuse me, we have talked about maybe dropping the gross receipts tax up 1/8 or 1/4%. So whatever we do isn't going to be drastic, because whatever we do, we have to live with when the funds aren't coming in.
I know that I've spoken to Senator Worth about one year where a last minute tax cut was passed, and he still considers it his biggest mistake as a senator in the legislature. There wasn't enough time to really examine the implications. And lo and behold, the tax cuts that sounded like a good idea that year were crippling in future years. So I know that you're a friend of Voices for Children. They're going to be advocating quite strongly for not making tax cuts, and we're going to support that. And I think one of the areas where some adjustments could be made is to create a higher tax bracket in the PIT that pays a higher percentage in the personal income tax, so that it's not something that is impacting middle income people. But last year, Roxanne and I got $1,600 back from the state. I believe that's the amount. It's like we didn't need that. And so, if you're going to give it back, there's some people who definitely could use it, and maybe do it in the form of a early child or family tax credit, low income family tax credit.
That $1,600 you received from the state was taxable, and a lot of people didn't know that. So for low income people, receiving that money is great, but then when it comes tax time, it tipped a few people over, so they ended up paying taxes when they didn't pay taxes before. So we need to, those are the types of things that we need to look at if we do anything.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything. The only thing we haven't covered, we didn't go back and circle back on your climate and public health bill. And one of the questions I had was, if we look into the future and assume that there's going to be some kind of drastic, prolonged heat event in New Mexico, you'd have to be crazy to not think that's going to happen. If it happens in California and Arizona, it's just coming this way. So in what ways could this office in the Public Health Department help rural communities and urban communities plan for the inevitable heat event?
Good question, both on the cold and the hot, because, last year or the year before, my electric is under P&M, and I'm tied into a solar, but we also have a tiny bit of backup, because when the electricity goes out, we want to have at least one little spot that's warm. So last year or the year before, it was 0 degrees, and my entire area of Highway 14 was cut off of electricity for over 12 hours. It was 0 degrees. The houses really dropped temperature-wise. People who were on oxygen really had major problems. El Dorado, where I think you live, there's a certain area of El Dorado that's in rolling blackouts because their whole transmission has to be replaced, and P&M is working on that. So when you talk about heat, we have to look at cold as well. We need to make sure that there's a backup for whenever electricity goes down for those people who really need the emergency services, and also to stay minimally warm. For the heat, we have had such debate in the legislature about children who are riding on school buses and not retrofitting them with air conditioning. And when you are sitting in a bus and it's 100 degrees out, it's 110 or 120 inside the school bus. And people don't get it, that these children aren't just on the school bus for 15 or 20 minutes. Some of them are on the school bus for 3 hours. So we have to look at both ends. We have to look at public facilities that are available to take in people for cooling. We have to look at ways to get air conditioning or swamp coolers into places where people can get respite. And when we put money into weatherization, and the weatherization actually assists low-income people in their homes, retrofitting their homes, it is allowed to work on heating and cooling in those homes. So all your listeners should be aware of that if they're low income or they know somebody who's low income, they might qualify for these projects.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to hear because I mean it was pretty depressing to watch poor Buffalo. Um, Roxanne and I did a 10,000-mile trip in 2018 road trip through all these different cities across the United States to meet with advocates and activists. And Buffalo was our favorite city of all
Mm.
that we traveled to. Just incredible community organizations there working with the city and the state to create some real good economic justice, environmental justice programs. And we took a tour around Buffalo with one of the leaders, and he showed us how they had taken an abandoned school and turned it into a senior center and a community center on the bottom floor with music and arts and crafts programs and so forth, and how they also employed low-income people to retrofit homes and to create, swamp coolers and the like. And it was just wonderful. It was like a community working as a community. And so it was so painful to see a community just completely devastated by just unbelievable amounts of snow. And I'm pretty sure New Mexico is not ready for anything like that. We don't
That's
tend to
right.
get anything like that, but we probably will get something like that at some point. So
If
it's good to
people,
have.
if people haven't noticed, we are drastically changing in terms of our climate and our weather here in the state.
Yep, it is. Yes, yes, indeed. Well, it's good to have legislators like you, Senator, who are looking out for us, and we'll be in communication over the next few weeks to make sure that we have information about the bills you're advancing and get our folks, calling in on Zoom or coming to the legislature. I'm actually planning to be there every day this year. I missed it so much. I'm going to be there one way or the other. So, thank you for spending time with us. You have a happy new year. Hello to Linda and take good care. And thank you for
Thank
being with
you.
us. Thank
And
you.
the best to you and Roxanne as well, Paul.
Okay. And by the way, I live in Santa Fe, not El Dorado.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay.
I thought you were out there in those hinterlands. I'm down south.
Yeah, no, we're northwest New Mexico, Santa Fe.
Okay, great.
You know where Las Campanas is?
Yes.
Well, we're at that exit, but we're not in Las Campanas.
Okay.
Very small development off of Tano Road. Anyway,
Hmm.
our listeners don't need to know where I live.
Right. You can cut all this out.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.